Aramaic word and means empty head. If he sneers at him, he will have to answer for it in the fires of hell. The Greek there says if he calls him a moron, and that's the Greek word, and the Greek word moron is where we get our English word moron from, and it means moron. And Jesus goes on to extend this whole line of thinking quite a long distance, such that killing is could be seen as the end result of an attitude. And the attitude is of thinking of someone else as empty-headed or moronic, as, in other words, as less than you are, less than a human being, less than worthy life. And I mean, who kills someone who, I can only imagine murdering someone if I thought they weren't worth anything, right? The book of Deuteronomy are worth less than me, anyway. The book of Deuteronomy takes this, you shall not bear false witness. Now, the very language already indicates something. The commandment has a courtroom procedure or something like it in mind. Perjuring yourself is what the commandment itself seems to have in mind. But the book of Deuteronomy takes that to greater length and does so along the lines that Jesus does when he talks about the commandment against murdering. It's a very brief passage, and I'm tempted, and whenever I'm tempted to do such a thing, I always end up doing it. So here we go. I'm going to read the whole passage to you, and then we're going to talk about it. Now, ask yourself, this has to do with bearing false witness in the way the book of Deuteronomy understands it. Be careful how you act in all cases of malignant skin disease. Be careful to observe all that the Levitical priests tell you. I gave them my commands, which you must obey. Remember what the Lord, and here's the key, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on your way out of Egypt. By the way, I teach my students that one of the most important tools you can have in interpreting the Bible is knowing the whole thing. Because do you remember what the Lord did to Miriam? See, we'll talk about that in a minute, because that turns out to be pretty important here. When you make a loan to another man, do not enter his house to take a pledge from him. Don't go in the house to get the collateral. Wait outside, and the man whose creditor you are shall bring the pledge out to you. If he's a poor man, you shall not sleep in the cloak he has pledged. Give it back to him at sunset, so that he may sleep in it and bless you. Then it will be counted to your credit in the sight of the Lord your God. Can you imagine our banking system working that way? You shall not keep back the wages of a man who is poor and needy, whether a fellow countryman or an alien living in your country in one of your settlements. Pay him his wages on the same day before sunset. For he is poor, and his heart is set on them. He may appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty of sin. Fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor children for their fathers. A man shall be put to death only for his own sin. You shall not deprive aliens and orphans of justice, nor take a widow's cloak in pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I command you to do this. When you reap the harvest in your field and forget a swath, do not go back and pick it up. It shall be left for the alien, the orphan, and the widow, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all that you undertake. When you beat your olive trees, because they have misbehaved, I guess. Give that olive tree a good beating is what I'm doing. Do not strip them afterwards. What is left shall be for the alien, the orphan, and the widow. When you gather the grapes from your vineyard, do not glean afterwards. What is left shall be for the alien, the orphan, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. That is why I command you to do this. When two men go to law and present themselves for judgment, the judges shall try the case. They shall acquit the innocent and condemn the guilty. If the guilty man is sentenced to be flogged, the judge shall cause him to lie down and be beaten in his presence. The number of strokes shall correspond to the gravity of the offense. They may give him 40 strokes, but not more. Otherwise, if they go further and exceed this number, your fellow countrymen will have been publicly degraded. You shall not muzzle an ox while it is treading in the corn. And that's the end of the section. Do these laws sound all disparate and disconnected to you? They did to me on first reading. But there are clues throughout here. And the first is in that remember what I did to Miriam, right? There's an episode in the wilderness wandering period when Miriam and Aaron, their brother, I guess the best way to put it would be to say that they got jealous of Moses' status. And they started spreading rumors about Moses' wife, and were stirring up trouble among the people. And you know that Israel during that time period murmured all the time. What's a thing? It was easy to stir up trouble, and they were stirring it up. And God basically said, you know, you can't be jealous about him this way. He's the one I chose to lead, and he's leading, so you need to quit that. And God sent Miriam a case of leprosy to straighten her out. Now let's reread that again. Be careful how you act in all cases of malignant skin disease. Be careful to observe all that the Levitical priests tell you. I gave them my commands, you obey. So, the Miriam situation gives us a context in which she was bearing false witness. Right? And the result was that she sowed discontent amongst the people, and God had to take her in hand, straighten her out a little bit. The commandment begins by saying it's an act of bearing false witness if you don't accord to the Levitical priests the authority that God granted them. Are you following what I'm talking about? How about the next one? When you take a loan from another man, do not enter his house to take a pledge. And if it's a poor person, who would probably have the only collateral they could offer would be not a piece of furniture. They don't own a house. It would have to be his coat, you know, his outer garment. You can take that in pledge, but you have to give it back every night at nightfall, because that's going to be the only thing the fellow has to sleep in. I can imagine that would be an arduous process. Right? Don't go in the house. What seems to be at stake here? How are you bearing false witness if you do those sorts of things? There's a key later on. If you exceed this number, this is nearly the end, your fellow countrymen will have been publicly humiliated, degraded. Would it be humiliating to go knock on somebody's house and say, I'm here for my collateral, get out of the way? Who would you be degrading him in front of? His own family, right? And we're back, and how is that bearing false witness? We're back to Jesus' logic here. You'd be treating a human being as though they deserve to be treated this way. It's just money. You don't have the right. You're saying about a fellow Israelite that he is insignificant. In the background here, by the way, is the notion, that runs throughout the Bible, that we are created in God's image. Ultimately, to treat another human being as less significant than you are is to say what? That human being doesn't bear the image of God to the same degree I do. And you end up bearing false witness against whom? Yeah. Let's see if let's hypothesize that on the basis of the first two of these laws and see if it runs throughout. You shall not keep back the wages of a man who is poor and needy, whether a fellow countryman or an alien. Does our hypothesis about bearing false witness because you're treating someone in the image of God as though they aren't worth it bear out so far? This is... I grew up in church thinking that the Old Testament was full of these restrictive laws that covered some pretty arcane subject matter, right? Very limited, had little application to the world I lived in. And I've told you the story how I ended up in Deuteronomy, haven't I? When I joined the commentary editorial board, was told I had to write one. And that's the good news. The bad news is Deuteronomy's all that's left. And I went, and I fallen in love with the book. And I fall in love with the book for these reasons. This is a pretty radical extension of the idea of what bearing false witness means. It's very much like the kind of thinking Jesus did in what we read. If you kill somebody, it's because you've come to think of them as not worthy of living. Right? And you become a murderer, Jesus said, long before you raised the axe. You became a murderer when you decided that person deserves to die. I don't think that person has worth. And here we see that kind of reasoning at work quite radically. This legislation requires you to take into account the human dignity of creditors. Let's see who else. Let's see who else. Fathers shall not be put to death for their children, or children for their fathers. No guilt by association. That's denying the dignity of the individual. You shall not deprive aliens and orphans of justice, nor take a widow's cloak in pledge. Even the most, what's the word I want? Even the lowliest in society bear God's image and should be treated with the dignity that another human being deserves. When you harvest in a field, forget a swath. When you get grapes, one of my favorites in this regard is, where is it? That whole business about publicly degrading someone who's been beaten, even who's been found guilty. Even criminals deserve to be respected as human beings. Yes?
I followed you along so far up until this week.
Yeah.
False witness to me has always been false. Therefore, I mean, you're telling a lie. You're telling something that's not true. And I can't connect it to what
I'm saying that in the kind of reasoning Jesus did, you're telling a lie about God, by the way. If you don't treat another human being, I don't care what their social status, I don't care whether they're criminals, if you don't treat them as fully bearing the image of God the same way you do, then you're telling a lie. You're saying, that person's not worth what I'm worth, and that's a big old lie. That is a big old lie. Right? It is one, by the way, which pervades our society, I'm afraid. We even talk about, oh, he's worth $10 billion. No, he has $10 billion in the bank, maybe, but he's worth about the same thing I am. Do you follow?
Yeah.
He has no more inherent worth because of what he has in the bank than the baby born yesterday to the poorest mama in the country. Yes?
Go back to the numbers. You said 1 million a couple weeks ago. Is this crucible of thought happening among how many people in the Middle East of that Bible following? How many? All
right, let me see if I understand. How many were around at the time this text was written?
And how many were following those rules as the rules to live by?
Well, if you're talking about at a certain point in time or cumulatively ever since, every Jew in the world today, they have a very, there's a whole tractate of the Mishnah devoted to this subject and of the Talmud as well.
But they were still dealing with horrible forces outside that had none of those rules.
Yeah, I mean, if I get where you're going, it's that problem that we have in our society because we're pluralistic and we separate church and state. But we also have to acknowledge that historically, the biggest shaping factor on American culture and law has been supposedly the Judeo-Christian tradition. And I would argue that there are parts of our tradition we didn't call into play very well, I would say. Now, Now it's pluralistic, and I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't run for any public office and say I'm a Baptist preacher with an Old Testament PhD, and I'm here to straighten out our law so that it conforms to the book of Deuteronomy better. But, you knew there was a but coming, and here it is. But as a Baptist preacher with a PhD in Old Testament, I will say to the church that we are supposed to be the church first. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. And as it happens, I was born in America and have never left, except to go abroad and study. I've never changed my citizenship, because you look the world over and I'd rather be here, right? But my first allegiance, the first covenant, I am a citizen. My first covenant loyalty, however, covenant loyalty, is to what we're talking about here. And I don't leave it when I walk into a voting booth, do I? The church is separate from the state, but I don't have two halves. I'm one me, and it's always Christian, I hope. It always behaves that way, I hope. Right?
Dr. Biddle.
Oh, gosh. All right. I sort of thought this, so here we go. Yes.
I'm thinking of the woman who was in charge of giving marriage licenses.
Mm-hmm.
And she was.
Oh, I opened the door for this, didn't I? Yeah, go ahead.
And that was a challenge to me, because she was standing up for what she believed in.
Mm-hmm.
But the law had made it all right, and she was an agent of the law. So you get into sticky wickets with
You
that.
do get into sticky wickets pretty quickly. And as it happens, I've been invited to deliver some lectures next spring, and they're going to be on this topic, and I'm thinking about it hard. I don't know what the lectures are going to say yet, because you do get into sticky wickets. Now, all right, do you all mind if we do a little church history? Will that be all right? Let's go. Baptists come from the radical wing of the Reformation, and we have Anabaptist roots. And we have, Baptists are sort of a hybrid. We have Anabaptist roots and we have Congregationalist roots. But on the Anabaptist side of the house, the Anabaptists, you know who they were. They, especially in southern Germany and northern Switzerland. The early confessions, there's one called the Schlotheim Confession.
Could you speak up?
Yeah, there's a confession called the Schlotheim Confession that dates to 15, I forgot what. But they have, in articles in their early confessions of faith, typically on the magistracy will be one of them, on the sword it will be another, and on the oath will be a third that have to do with what we're talking about. And the Anabaptists followed simple biblical hermeneutic. Jesus said to do something or not to do it, and they did it or didn't do it because Jesus said so. Right? And Jesus said, don't swear. You remember that? Jesus said, those who live by the sword die by the sword. So on and so forth. They were convinced that the church consisted of baptized believers, and so all of that logic, you can't swear, you shouldn't use a sword, that would be power and violence, and so forth. They concluded that if you can't take an oath and you can't coerce, then a Christian cannot be in government. That was their conclusion. Flat out. Because how are you going to, I mean, this woman took an oath of office.
Right, and also gets $80,000 a year for doing it.
She took an oath. The Anabaptist thinking would be not only separation of church and state, but what I just advocated against a moment ago, which is separation of person, believer, from participation in the apparatus of the state. Do you follow what I'm saying? Well, I have, you probably won't be surprised to hear this, I have strong Anabaptist leanings, personally. But when you start talking about that way, you've just said that the element of the population whom I would most want to be in charge now has to withdraw and leave it to everybody else. That's not, I don't like that much. Don't like that at all, right? So there's always this tension. I would say, however, that when you take, I would say personally, when you take the oath of office, then you haven't said, you've taken the oath of office.
That's what it is.
And there it is. and you do what is responsible for you, or resign. I mean,
Well, that's what I was
But she's
thinking.
free to resign anytime she wants.
That's
to.
what I thought. I
Yeah,
thought,
yeah.
you know, she should have just said, well, I'll just leave
Yeah,
this.
and this whole business about I want to exercise my personal faith and all the particulars of what I believe when I hold public office. Oh Lord, you don't want me in office. That's what I'm going to do there. And be a bad. There'll be a lot of people who don't have a lot of things and don't get to do a lot of things they now do, because I could not issue all sorts of licenses in good conscience. Except I would if I took the oath. That's why I have never taken the oath of office. Because I can't do some of those. It's a heavy thing. Now, it's a heavy responsibility that I don't think the church in America has thought through very carefully yet. And we're in a time when we're going to have to. Yes.
For thoughts on your upcoming discussions, you might want to address the flip of that. Is if I'm a Christian,
Right.
how can I rationalize stepping into a public position?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing, but I am not going to address that individual stuff. Shall I run for office question, so much as I am going to address what ought to be the church's role in public affairs. There are those among us, probably not in this room, but there are those in this state anyway, who think that the church ought to run things pretty much. They are nostalgic for those days, which you and I saw the tail end of, when in my hometown, if the preacher at First Baptist didn't endorse you, you were not going to be elected mayor. There you go. Just forget it. You could get the endorsement of the Methodist preacher and the Presbyterian preacher and the Anglican priest. That wasn't going to do it. It had to be the preacher at First Baptist. It just had to be. Because that's the way it was. Those days are over, even in my little hometown. And I'm grateful for it, except that now I'm not grateful, because all kinds of things are happening back there that I wish weren't happening. Right? And this is a dilemma we face. We once had a structural advantage. And during those days, we didn't have to bear witness. We're back to that question. We did not have to bear true witness very well to get our way, right? And now we're in a situation where there are all sorts of ideas out there in the marketplace of ideas and beliefs and convictions and lifestyles. We get to see whether ours is as quality as we think it is. We believe it to be in our heart, and whether or not we actually live it out well enough for people to see it. You know that whole saying that it was G.K. Chesterfield, I think it was, who said Chesterton that Christianity has not failed. It's not a bad idea. It's just never been found wanting. That's what he said. It's not that it's been tried and been found wanting. It's that it's never been fully tried, right? And I would like to see what would happen if a church, somewhere, just really shown as a Christian community for about 3 years. I'd just love to see what happened, what would happen in a circumstance like that. It will involve, I think, everything we've talked about, especially what we're talking about today. Seeing the full dignity and value in every human being, and not bearing false witness about stratifications in society, as though some are worth more than others. As a matter of fact, how many times did we hear about the widow, the orphan? The book of Deuteronomy seems to, in Catholic circles now, they talk about the preferential option for the poor. Have you heard that language? It's a big part of Catholic social teaching these days. The preferential option for the poor. And that notion is very much the notion of the book of Deuteronomy, that in God's eyes, God wants us to pay more attention, give greater value to the people who seem to be the most valueless in terms of the way the society would view them. And that's pretty amazing, isn't it? I can remember when I was a seminarian being taught, and this is all sociology stuff, and it works, but it's not the gospel. That what was known as the church growth movement back in the 70s. It's no longer around. I'm glad to say. A couple of principles they had discovered there, that smaller units grow faster. Does that make sense? And that homogeneous units grow faster. So the way, if you wanted to plant a church somewhere, you go out in one of the suburbs here in the West End, and you build a church that's designed for 30 and 40-year-old upper middle income people, right? And if you'll do that, you can build you a church of a pretty good sized church pretty quickly of 30 and 40-year-old upper middle, middle income people. And the way to stop that from happening is to pay attention to two neighborhoods over, where they're not so upper middle income. And you'll stop that rapid numerical growth in its tracks. I remember already when I was a college student that there was a church not far from where I went to school, and I went to a Baptist school, and where there were a bunch of us preacher boys there. And they put up ads all over the bulletin boards every year about if we would come to their church on a Wednesday night, they would feed us, and then they would load us up in buses, and we would go out and do personal evangelism. You know. Well, I was hungry. I went one time. Hungry boy. I went one time, and I expected us to be around in the neighborhood, and they bussed us halfway across town to a pretty affluential neighborhood. And I realized, why aren't they interested in the neighborhood around them? And I came up with this hypothesis that I still hold to be true. It works this way in our personal lives. You'll be more likely to talk about your faith to somebody you don't know than you will be to a very close friend or family member. And the reason is because the people who know you know what a sorry son of a gun you are. And you can't sell them a bill of goods as easy. A bill of goods as easy. Bearing false witness. Now, you've got me way off my lesson plan. But I think that's all right. Why don't we just continue this as a conversation? Think about how it is we as the church bear false witness, especially along the lines of human dignity, the dignity of another human being. Does this have anything to say about immigration policy? Does it have anything to say about minimum wage? I mean, I know I'm talking about political issues. And another one of the dilemmas that I think we face is that when we're confronted with the fact that we're talking, among other things, about public policy issues, and we acknowledge, number two, that we're the church and the secular realm doesn't have to care what we believe on the basis of what the Bible teaches. They're not obligated. They aren't part of this covenant. Right? I know that. But I also know that one of the reactions historically has been to say, well, then the church will just abandon these concerns and we'll be about spiritual matters. Right? And that's when you start saying, well, I know you're suffering, but heaven's going to be great. And I love you, and I wish you weren't suffering, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I know that the political structures and the economic structures are stacked against you, but I'm about seeking, I'm about saving your soul. You're just going to have to starve. Can't do anything about that. It's not my job.
Or worse. I don't want to mess with it, but I've got this thing called government.
And they're going to let them take care of it.
Let them take care of it.
That's right. That's right. And I'm not going to, see, I don't want to impose my Christianity on the secular realm. On the other hand, I'm going to vote it every time I go to the voting pool. But, Because otherwise the church and me, all of us are bearing false witness. We're saying that the dignity of those people doesn't matter to God. And it doesn't matter to me. That's wrong.
It seems like there's some gray area here, though. So take the case of minimum wage.
Right.
Who decides what the appropriate level is of minimum wage so that you're not bearing?
Well, here,
are bearing it, and then why should the government even intervene with that and
Right.
decide that? Why shouldn't it just be the marketplace that decides who gets paid what?
That's what you get, Mark, when you go these routes. Just keep your mouth shut, and you don't have. I've ever told y'all, I stayed in trouble the first few years of my teaching career, and I was in trouble all the time. And I was telling my mother about it once, and she said, "Mark, why don't you just teach what the Bible says?" I said, "Mom, that's what I've been doing. That's why I'm in trouble all the time." That's when I learned to say, I will tell my students from time to time now, I learned to use this phrase. Back during the first 3 or 4 years of my teaching, I read something in the Bible as plainly as I can to my students, and I say, now listen, I did not write this. I'm just reading it to you. Right? I have trouble, I'll give you a short answer. I have trouble with marketplace arguments, especially in economics. Because the whole marketplace is based on the notion that I'm as greedy as you are and will let my greed and your greed fight it out. Is that right? Yep. That doesn't sound very Christian to me. That's depending on the unredeemed quality of humankind, and I'm about redemption. But that's a short answer. The longer answer is we get in there and all vote about it. I don't get to decide. In this country, we all get to decide. But I am going to decide in one direction. My vote goes one way, right? If I can. And it's going to be about the dignity of all human beings. That matters to me a lot, based on Scripture teaching. By the way, do you think of any other New Testament passages that come to mind along? You certainly should. I was in prison, and you? Yeah. Yeah. I was hungry, and you? Yeah. I was thirsty. Jesus kicks it up. Jesus says, see in the most needy, don't just see the image of God, see who? See Jesus. Whoa. Man. I've quit teaching and gone to preaching, haven't I? Quit preaching and gone to meddling. I'm sorry, I can't help it.
But Mark, hasn't the church I mean, the church has pushed government into that role as opposed to taking on this role.
Oh yeah. And well, the church is, I don't think, well, a lot of people are frightened for the future of the church right now because we have come out of this phase when we were those dominant structuring element, and especially in the South. Good Lord. In my home state of Alabama, good Lord. And a lot of people think, church is losing its influence and we're floundering around and the young people are leaving and not going to come back. You hear that talk? I think it's good for us to realize that we can no longer count on this sort of artificial allegiance that we've enjoyed first part of my life anyway. It's time to be the church now, and the fact that we're kind of getting cut loose from some things and being challenged, and it's no longer you don't go to church because you're expected to by the culture around you. Now you're going to have to go to church, and that's not even the best way to think about being church, but now you go to church because you want to be. That's something that you value. It's valuable to you. And we're going to have to quit bemoaning the fact that you can get elected to public office in this country now without being a deacon down at First Baptist in Fort Payne. And that you don't, you don't put in your advertising if you're a car dealership, and I teach Sunday school at First Baptist, we're gonna have to start being the church, or the church will die. But I'm confident that the church can be the church. I just want it to start, right? I'm confident of it. I could get all preachy here. I still believe Jesus saves, right? And it changes people's lives. So let's do it, right?
What do you see as the growth, when you look at your students, when you look at to a student population, what are you seeing? Is it growing? Are they curious? Are they bored or what?
Well, I said I'm not one of those that's frightened for the future of the church, although I can almost be sometimes. and you've raised an area. When I was a seminarian, over half the student body were young men like myself who had gone to a Baptist. I was in a Baptist seminary. Had gone to a Baptist college as undergraduate and done a religion major and a history major and an English major and that sort of thing, and gone straight to seminary. I graduated myself on a Friday night, and had loaded up the truck on Monday and was in Louisville. This past entering class at BTSR, we had one such student. I'm teaching people mostly within a decade of my age nowadays. Most of them second career, a lot of them still, working full-time jobs and going to seminary. When I say the young people have left, they have. We'll see if they're coming back.
All right, I'm going to counter that because I work at Union.
Yeah.
And our entering class is about half and half. Half young people, pretty fresh out of school.
Right.
And half that are second and third and fourth careers.
Yeah.
I have a whole lot of hope for the church because these people, and the young people, young and the older people, are aware the church has got to change.
Yeah.
And they're jumping on that bandwagon and trying to figure out what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And they're going into this knowing they're not going to make any money.
Yeah, I would agree with the attitude of the students. But there was a time when Union was 3/4 or 80 or 90% traditional students.
All right, so what I like about the second and third career students is that they are willing to make a change in who they are. They're leaving banking careers and law degree careers.
I'm
and are willing to be the church.
I'm teaching lawyers and bankers.
And this is what we're going to have to do. You said we're not about saving people. We need to be about coming to church not for comfort, but to be the church, to work, and to change the way we live and give up a lot of what we have. Now, so I'm preaching now.
There's room for more than one preacher.
Really I mean, I really do, because I think the people who are training to lead the church are aware it isn't going to be at all like what it used to be.
And it's not going to be real soon. We're talking a lot more about bivocational pastorates. I imagine y'all are too. Is that a question?
And we're also, in our educational system, offering opportunities for kids to basically be interns in public service. My niece did a year in service in Philly, now she's gone back. She's Catholic, but has gone back. We're seeing many more kids do that to make sure they know they're choosing the right career rather than going straight into seminary. I keep hearing that.
Bearing false witness. And I want to remind us that the Deuteronomy makes this about the dignity of a fellow human being. Every one of those, except for the don't muzzle an ox. I forgot to point that one out while it's eating, suggesting that God cares even about the dignity of oxen. That's pretty cool. But we've had a lot about oxen, haven't we? Getting them out of the ditch and all that kind of stuff. Oxen were a big deal. Yes.
Go deeper on where it says, and follow all the laws.
Yeah, that's a couple of that's back there with the Levitical priests. And remember, it reminds us of that time with Miriam and Aaron when they were actively undermining Moses' authority. We have to. I mean, we can imagine, sort of, hear the other side of a conversation, and imagine that there were Israelites who didn't like that the priests were telling them do this, do that, do the other thing in a obedience to the law, and they had to be reminded that Miriam got leprosy.
But it feels to me like the message is follow the big law. I always think of follow the big message and don't let all the
Yeah, except this
little
says be
messages get in the
careful,
way.
be careful how you behave in cases of malignant skin diseases. This is not the big law.
Okay, no.
What the big principle is the authority of priesthood. Now, authority is a big issue for all of us. I mean, in every aspect of our lives, and we're Protestants partly because of our understanding of authority in the church, right? And is another one. Many things in life are a question of the mean, the Aristotelian mean. My daughter always used to ask these. One time she said, "Are potatoes good for you?" And I said, "Well, unless you just eat nothing but potatoes, they're okay for you." She said, "But they have carbohydrates." Well, yeah, but you have to have some carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not evil. You even have to have some fat to make your brain work. So let's just be honest. All right, what is authority? The Bible, in my own experience, also would suggest that we need to understand the difference between authority and authoritarianism, right? Between structure and the Greek word that is translated in the Bible, authority, is exousia, which is a compound. Ex is from, and ousia is a participle of the verb to be. So authority is from your being. Related to our English word authority comes from author, and an author is someone who writes something, creates something. Your authority comes from authority when it comes rightly from who you are and what you know. That's one thing. When it's something you just wield as a stick and can't back it up, that's authoritarianism, right? You following me? Mm-hmm. And this text is saying the priests have authority and you'd better pay attention to it. Right. Miriam was saying that Moses was authoritarian and shouldn't be followed so closely. Do you see the distinction? So somebody who deserves to be listened to because they know what they're talking about and have wisdom, that's one thing. Somebody who stands up and says, "I'm the boss around here," because I am. Everybody with me? Okay.
Let me take this into the punishment aspect.
Okay.
You've got punishment in the afterlife, and you've got punishment, corporal punishment that's limited to 40 strokes. And then you get into the stoning aspect. I have a little problem with
I do too.
where the distinctions.
I do too. I mean, I won't, as an Old Testament professor, I won't say that the Old Testament, I will not say that the Old Testament does not come from an ancient culture that was a lot cruder than ours. I'm not going to defend ancient Israelite culture in that regard. And I do think that my understanding of Scripture is analogous to my understanding of the Incarnation. And that is that Jesus was fully human and fully divine. I think that the Bible is the inspired record of God's revelation, but it was delivered to us in moments in time by human authors who knew nothing other than their cultures and languages. Are you following me? Their settings. So it's just like we refer to this in theological circles as the scandal of particularity. The scandal that God, scandalously to some of us, deals with particular people in their contexts and became incarnate in a particular person, right? And that person was male. Is that a slight to all you women? Well, he had to be a he or a she, right? That's the scandal of particularity, right? And God decided to bring salvation to the world by choosing a people, and he chose Israel. Could he have chosen Anybody else? Sure he could have. And you understand now the scandal of particularity. That God seems to be a God who works through particulars. One of the particulars that's scandalous is that he chosen to work through an ancient society that the context included stoning and beating and all of that kind of thing. It doesn't embarrass me anymore. It used to, a little bit. It doesn't embarrass me anymore. It's just one of the scandals of particularity that you have to deal with. It's a problem, however, if you take those particulars and absolutize them, in my way of thinking. I don't wear a robe and sandals because Jesus did, right? I didn't study carpentry because Jesus was a carpenter, right? That whole "what would Jesus do" movement is stupid. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because we are not called to be Jesus. We are called to be the best the best me I can be. I'm called to to carry my cross and do my thing in authentic ways. I used to tell my students, when you're going to the department store to register your china for your wedding, you get your china pattern, that is not the time and place to ask yourself, what would Jesus do? Because Jesus wouldn't be getting married in the first place. And he wouldn't be getting a china pattern. Are you? I mean, we're not all called to be Jesus. We're back to that question of human perfection, and this is related to the dignity issue that we talked about. What would it be to be a perfect human being? What voice part would a perfect human being have? Sing from the lowest bass to the highest soprano, all of them? What color would the perfect human being's hair be? Well, I think it would be brown with gray. With gray. Yeah. You see where I'm perfect? At perfect height is about 6'1". Would the perfect human being be a good golfer? No. He allows a golfer. Do you see what I'm saying? Until we see that the dignity of every human being resides in something other than accomplishment and money. That's what these texts are about, aren't they? If you think the way we think, Jesus was the biggest failure that ever walked the face of the earth. Died alone, all of his best friends afraid to be seen with him. Died penniless. We bear false witness when we don't understand what human dignity and what the imago Dei, what the image of God is in each and every one of us. All right, I want to say a thing or two about next week. Next week is "Thou shalt not covet," which is the hardest commandment to talk about because nobody quite knows what it means, except that it does shift from behaviors to more internal. How do you measure coveting? I can tell if "Thou shalt not kill." I can tell whether you're obeying that commandment in the direct and immediate sense, right? What is involved in coveting, and the ancient Israelite didn't think in terms of what's going on inside people very much. We know this because the Bible doesn't talk about it, and yet here's this one commandment that focuses very much on internal intention. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about the covenant we've been talking about and the new covenant. So we're going to do two topics next time, and I hope it's going to be helpful because it's easy. We've been talking a lot today about how old this is and how specific to a culture it was. What is the new covenant, and what are its terms and conditions, if you will? What's its shape? We'll talk about that next week. And yes.
Just the women and John were there when you died.
The women and John were at the cross. Yeah. Yeah.
But you're thinking of all the other disciples.
Yeah, I'm thinking about
Peter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gone.
I just wanted to give credit to
the women. Very good. By the way, that's another one of those scandals of particularity that the church has hidden from itself all these years. The first evangelists were all women. Who told Peter that the tomb was empty? We'll see you next week.